In WorldBox, there are a ridiculous number of settings you can mess with, including taxes and tributes. But here's the annoying part, the game never tells you the exact percentage behind each option. So today I'm pitting two identical civilizations against each other, with one crucial difference. One of them is going to pay the highest taxes possible, while the other is basically going to pay nothing. To make this as realistic as I can, I had to run a non-native modular integration process through manual asset injection into the base executable environment. Or, in normal human words, I had to download a mod that lets me edit a kingdom's laws, including how much it collects in taxes. And there are three types. Base tax, which is the basic tax everyone pays just for living in the kingdom. GDP tax, which is basically a tax on production, like infrastructure, weapons, food, you name it. And finally, raw tax, which is collected from extracting the map's natural resources. And of course, kingdoms also have expenses, so depending on how they manage things, they can run a surplus or a deficit. To start, we're using this circular map I prepared earlier. I split it right down the middle and gave each side different biomes, so it's easier to tell them apart. Then we dropped two groups of 5 humans each. On the right side, we're going with the lowest taxes possible. And here's the part I actually love. We know that by enabling this law, the kingdom gets 60% less income, plus 20 stability, because people are happier with the government, and 10% less WE gain, which is basically how fast they rack up war exhaustion. In other words, they can hold out better during conflict. On the other side, we crank taxes to the absolute maximum. That gives the kingdom 75% more income, but it also drops stability by 20 and increases war exhaustion by 10%. This mod has a ton more settings too, so I'll probably make another video with it later. Not even a minute goes by and we already get our first complaint in the high tax kingdom. Workers are dissatisfied with conditions and threaten a nationwide strike unless demands are met. Accepting their demands costs 1,000 gold. And look, I don't consider myself an oppressor, but it's been like 5 minutes since the tax law kicked in, so yeah, get back to work. Besides, we don't even have the money to accept the demands anyway. I renamed both kingdoms so we can track them better, and even though a bunch of workers on the high tax side started striking, their population still grew a lot. They even built a mill. The low tax side looked a bit more messy, but they still had basically the same progress. That said, a big population gap started showing up fast. In no time, the high tax kingdom doubled the low tax kingdom's population, and they kept building more and more houses. And the difference wasn't just population. The high tax kingdom stacked way more gold, which was expected. What surprised me is they also had a much higher happiness rating, and honestly, you can see it without even checking a stat screen. The high tax side just keeps pumping out housing non-stop. So far, everything's going in favor of the high tax side. Let's see if they can actually hold stability over the next few decades. We hit the 1st century, and weirdly enough, the low tax kingdom is now slightly ahead in population. Not by a lot, but still. In terms of internal development, you can see some concrete covered houses, but also a bunch of super basic tents. I'm spotting defensive towers, mines pulling more resources, and even training barracks. That makes me think even with low taxes, they're still spending on important stuff like the military and education, because they also built a library right next to the royal palace. Sure, they've still got a lot to improve, especially in the south where everything looks less developed, and they literally just started a new settlement down there. But overall, they're doing pretty solid. They've got a port with trade ships and warships, and most importantly, a tiny fishing boat dedicated to just fishing. Funny enough, it's the only port on the entire coastline. Clearly, they're not swimming in cash, so they're not wasting it. Now, don't assume the high tax kingdom is doing way better, because honestly, it's worse. I'm seeing way more underdeveloped cabins, even if the layout is pretty efficient. But for the insane taxes they're charging, they should be miles ahead. You can see how much gold they've got in storage, at least near the capital, because some warehouses farther out don't look nearly as rich. The low tax kingdom is managing its resources really well. Even while investing in infrastructure, they're still running a fiscal surplus of over 800 gold. Meanwhile, the high tax kingdom is spending almost nothing on infrastructure, which we already saw. And yeah, their surplus is way bigger, but a lot of that is coming from raw tax. They're pulling more than 21,000 gold from natural resources compared to 2,500 on the left side. And now it starts to make sense. A huge chunk of the high tax kingdom's money is getting siphoned into corruption. Basically, somebody's pocketing cash that isn't theirs, while infrastructure investment is almost non-existent. The timeline makes it super clear. About 60 years ago, everything flipped, and the low tax kingdom started building way more housing, even though they had basically half the resources of their rival. And not only that, they're also handling homelessness way better. We're in year 300 now, and once again, the world decides to do a complete plot twist. The high tax kingdom is back in the lead in population, and by a lot, mostly thanks to an insanely efficient building system that uses space really well. Plus the fact that 100% of their houses are fully upgraded. You can see that on the low tax side too, but not as much. There are still empty spaces. Also, the building pattern clearly favors the high tax side because there's less wasted space between houses. The gap in total gold is still huge. But honestly, homelessness massively favors the low tax kingdom. I thought it'd be interesting to check who the richest person in the world is, and shocker, it's the king of the high tax kingdom. Hopefully he built that fortune honestly and it's not coming from missing funds. What's funny is that even though he's the richest man alive, he still helps his citizens at the mills. Respect, I guess. Either way, we're going to let them develop until year 1000 and then start the fight. We hit year 1000 and we get hit with a curveball. A world pandemic is sweeping through the kingdoms. Every purple dot is an active infection. The left side got hit the hardest, to the point where it even fractured into multiple kingdoms. But I'd say we're in the final stage of the pandemic, because even though there are tons of infected people right now, vaccines have been developed and a lot of citizens are gaining immunity. Still, this whole situation wrecks both economies. The low tax side is now running a 400 gold deficit, while the high tax side, thanks to fracturing, manages to hold a balanced budget. Not long after that, the low tax side also fractured, and the high tax kingdom was down to literally 6 people. The good news is the infection is basically gone. You only see an occasional dot here and there. And this graph shows total world population over the last 100 years. The pandemic started around 50 years ago, and in that time, it wiped out 99% of the world's population. None of this was planned. I came here to start a war, but at this point, I've got no choice but to let the world cook for a few more centuries. We make it to year 1800, and finally both sides are fully recovered. The twist is that on the left side, one of the kingdoms that popped out of the fracture ended up dominating the entire territory. So we're just going to rename it because it's basically the new representative for the low tax side. And somehow, this new kingdom, which actually has over 700 years of history, has surpassed the high tax kingdom in infrastructure, homelessness control, and especially gold. They've got more than double. That means they managed it insanely well. And it's not a coincidence either, because the smartest person in the world belongs to that kingdom. Meanwhile, the current queen of the high tax side basically fumbled the bag. The royal family used to have over 50,000 gold, and now they barely have 14,000. Alright, it's time to drop the wall and let both sides meet. At first, nothing happens. They just visit each other and exchange a few lines of dialogue, but then things get awkward fast, to the point where people are literally crying. Soon enough, the relationship snaps when a soldier from the high tax side attacks a citizen from the low tax kingdom, and instantly the war kicks off. It starts with small border skirmishes, but it escalates fast, and a massive group of high tax soldiers invades enemy territory, and the low tax side hits back just as hard. The south becomes one of the bloodiest zones too. At a glance, it looks like the high tax side is winning because they're destroying houses, but when you zoom out and look at the full picture, you realize they're actually losing. They've been reduced to under 500 people, and they just lost one of their northern towns, followed by a huge chunk of the center that gets abandoned. This basically leaves the high tax kingdom with almost no soldiers, and their citizens don't even seem to realize what's happening. I don't know why, but for some reason, they're just catching on fire. At one point, the low tax kingdom was gathering a huge army, and without me even noticing, they'd already conquered the enemy capital. I swear it happened just from standing there. From here, it was only a matter of time before the high tax kingdom got wiped out. And yep, that's exactly what happened. Even though the capital ended up abandoned, the low tax side conquered the entire territory. Then every soldier casually goes back to their normal daily jobs, like they didn't just take part in a historic massacre. And after all that, one thing's clear: charging higher taxes doesn't automatically make a nation, or in this case a kingdom, better. Although to be fair, paying low taxes also won't save you from a world-ending mega bombing. So, did anyone survive? Maybe a rat or two. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, you can drop a like and a hype, which to this day, I still don't fully understand how it works.